You're listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience, a podcast dedicated to helping executives train their sales and marketing teams to optimize growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's accelerate your growth in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everyone, to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. I'm Carlos Noche, and I'm joined by my always intriguing podcast partner, Lisa Schneier. How are we doing today, Lisa?
Doing great, Carlos. How are you?
I'm good. It's sunny after 2 days of rain, so I'm feeling better.
We're getting 6 inches of snow tonight, so
sorry for you.
Yeah,
Spring what you get is around the corner.
Yeah, it's Canada.
But by the time this podcast comes out, it might be spring.
Maybe. Hopefully.
All right. So on a brighter note, today we're talking about building and running a world-class enablement function. What might be the best practices in making the most of your enablement investment?
And for this important topic today, we have some help from Kelly Lewis, who's the VP of Revenue Enablement at one of our technology partners at Value Selling, Highspot. And Kelly is super passionate about scaling teams so that every professional can operate at the top of their skill level while implementing the right tools and processes so teams can work smarter, not harder. Kelly has 20 years experience in technology sales, including being a sales leader and a boots on the ground rep. Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time today and welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today.
Awesome. All right. Before we jump into the topic of the day, we have our famous question that we start every podcast with. Kelly, what's something that you're passionate about that those that know you through work might be surprised to know about you?
I'm a mom. I've got a 4-year-old. I've got a 7-year-old. And I'm a working mom and my husband works and we're busy. And so I think at some point in my life, I am excited to get to the point where I can have cool passions and hobbies. But right now, my passion is, making sure I can build a community for my family and making sure I can survive day to day. So if anyone else is out there.
Fair enough, Kelly. And, that's the thing is that you can get into what your kids get into. Like 7 years old, she must be into certain things. Is she into reading? Is she into sports? Is she...
We're learning to ski. So that's been something we've been doing a lot of this winter is getting everyone up on the mountain. And some days we have great days and then some days it's cold and no one wants to ski. So Fair. I would say that's kind of our big thing this winter, which is learning to ski.
That's not a bad skill to have. Yeah. You got to do something in the winter months, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so Kelly, I couldn't help but notice that on your LinkedIn profile, you have had a career mostly in the medical sales field. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what ultimately led you to Highspot being completely out of that field and into the SaaS software space?
Absolutely. So my journey is a little unique. And frankly, I think I got lucky a little bit. I think everything comes with a little bit of luck. And part of that was I joined healthcare IT when everyone was investing in healthcare IT. So during the meaningful use era, if you will. And the government was spending a lot of money on making sure that our community hospitals had electronic medical records. And so right out of college, I got recruited and worked for Cerner Corporation, which is now Oracle, and was a rep. I had, field rep. I was on a plane 5 days a week. I was working with CEOs and selling to large health systems all across the Western United States. And it was a crazy experience, a lot of drinking from a fire hose. But that kind of, got me interested. My dad was in sales. And so I always kind of knew that sales or marketing was probably where I was headed. And so I ended up in sales for a very long time. Actually took a little bit of a career pivot when I had kids and decided to lead an inside sales team for a little bit so I could get off the road. And then as it progressed, I started doing some other things within the sales realm that I really liked, like enablement strategy and really working with the go-to-market leaders. When I was doing that, I actually became a customer of Highspot. So we implemented Highspot. I loved their customer success team. It was just such a great experience. And so when they called me up and asked if I would join, it was a very easy decision, but also hard in that I was giving up a career in healthcare IT, which is something I still love to follow and keep close to.
I totally understand that.
So, Kelly, when we get into the topic of the day, in this day and age of being authentic, I need to be real with you. I have to share that enablement teams within my accounts have proven to be, in most cases, the most valuable asset to a successful implementation. However, in a few other cases, they have been downright adversaries. And so I'd love to hear from you what you see as some of the best practices in establishing the enablement function. What should our listeners look for from enablement or position enablement to have success within their own businesses?
You know what? It's funny that you say that. I actually was talking to a CMO yesterday about enablement, and she called me and she was really nervous. She said, Kelly, I just got the revenue enablement team put under marketing, and I'm terrified. Revenue enablement is always the scapegoat for everyone else's problems. Like, I just got this new team that I'm going to constantly have to defend. How do I defend them? And she's not always wrong. That's actually something that you can easily find with a revenue enablement function if it's not done properly. The famous quote you'll get from a sales leader or from a rep, well, I wasn't enabled. And so I think it's a problem that enablers have to solve for and have to think really strategically about in how we both create an enablement function at our organizations and utilize that enablement function to actually drive behavior change versus really going back to that old training mentality of train something and move on to the next thing. And I think a lot of times that you find enablement adversarial is likely because of prioritization. So enablement can be a really key strategic partner in aligning go-to-market teams, but when they're not used in that way, enablement teams are frazzled because they've got priorities coming in from everywhere and they have no clear way to define where they should focus. And so, Carlos, your feedback, I hear you. I think that is actually something that enablement leaders think about all the time and how we overcome that.
It's funny you say CRO or whoever, I was not enabled. And maybe because I'm the old fart on this podcast by a mile. I don't remember. I remember an onboarding team. Somebody, you joined the company and it was maybe part of HR, maybe part of some other organization, and they onboarded you onto the organization and got you on track. In fact, I don't remember. We had a great team at Clarify. I can't remember what they fell under. Today, they seem to be a much bigger part of the organization. And you're right. In doing so, some people are kind of like, well, I think some leaders feel like, well, it's their job to enable my people. And I think that's wrong. It's leaders' job to enable their people. They need to take responsibility for people. Enablement is just one of the avenues to help you get there. And instead of seeing them as another group that helps with the process, you can't just dump all your problems on them. I'm curious, when you think about structure in an organization, where do you see enablement? And I mean, like you said, right now you're under the CMO. Is that we won't tell her? Is that like the best place in the organization? Is that is that one of the top three?
Ooh.
What do you think?
So this is a tough question. So I actually am very lucky. I report directly to the president of field ops here. So I have a seat at the table and I am peers with all the other go-to-market leaders, which, if you ask my opinion, that is where enablement should sit. And I think the reason enablement should sit there is we aren't necessarily a support function. We are really a partner to the go-to-market teams. And when used appropriately, we can really drive behavior change and the prioritization and goals of all the other go-to-market teams and how they align and focus. I think you often see enablement falling under RevOps. And I think that partnership is also so important. And I think a lot of RevOps leaders do this really well, but I think in order to do it well, because that can also become very adversarial, the leader of RevOps has to be very careful that their priorities don't always come first. They have to let that revenue enablement leader actually work with all of the stakeholders and prioritize as a group. If one person that's not the revenue enablement leader gets to control the conversation and the priorities, that is where you're going to come into issues and really struggle.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's everybody's vying for that top priority. So the collaboration is super important in order to get aligned and not to have silos, and to make sure that things actually get done rather than scattered all over the place and 50 projects that started but haven't finished yet, and they're all at different stages, and you're trying to roll something out and it's impossible.
Yeah, trying to run 100 changes at once never happens. But if you try to pick one or two big things that you really want to move the needle on, that's where you're going to find success with your enablement team. So going back to your question, Carlos, I think there's a lot of different places that enablement can fall. Like I said, there's a CMO that's going to be an enablement team. There are revenue leaders that have enablement teams, RevOps. You've got enablement like myself reporting directly to the president of field ops. I think it just depends on the organization, but I think you just have to make sure enablement team is empowered to work across stakeholders and not just within your own siloed department.
That's super important. So the next step of that we're curious about, and I think our listeners would be too, is what is the most effective way to measure the impact of enablement? So you're setting this up for the first time and you're thinking like, okay, what key metrics should I tie this to? You mentioned behavioral changes. Is there anything else that you would recommend?
Ooh, this is another tricky enablement question. And I think you can talk to anyone and they're trying to solve for it.
Yeah.
So I think when you see a less mature enablement organization, they're often measuring things like, did people come to my training and what rating did they give it with the survey? Here's my 2 cents. That is a great place to start, and everyone has to start somewhere. The thing I will say about survey data is that it usually doesn't lead you to the right conclusion. We actually just ran a field confidence survey, which is something we do with our teams. And bunch of questions. How confident are you in our product, our pricing, our messaging, et cetera? And we came back and we looked at the data and compared the people who were most confident to our highest attainers. Turns out our highest attainers are actually our least confident individuals within the organization.
Wow.
I think a little bit of that has to do with some type A personalities and just bias. But what I do think can be really effective in surveys is not the 1 to 5 scale, throw that data out, but look at the qualitative answers. What are people actually writing in the text box? How are you categorizing? Oh, can't talk right now. Categorizing all of that qualitative feedback and taking actions on that. So that's a great place to start if you don't have the ability to do a lot of leading indicators. The next step is, did they do the thing? Did they take the training? And then did they do the thing in the field you're asking them to do? And so oftentimes you're running an enablement initiative and you want to increase cross-sell. So if you're trying to increase cross-sell, the CTA or call to action for the rep might be, go have a business review with all of your customers. And so the next thing I look at is, did the people who took my enablement go actually have a business review? Okay, check the box. Enablement value right there. We got people to do the thing we were asking them to do. Now, the trickiest part is, did they do it well? Because that actually shows whether or not it's going to lead to positive business outcomes. So the next step is looking at something like media intelligence, your conversational intelligence tool, to actually use a rubric to say, was that business review good? Was it delivered well? And then the biggest key, and this is, if you can do this, you have unlocked the future of enablement. Can you show that the people who took your enablement did the business review well, generate pipeline, and close those deals? And so I call it the walk to value. That's what we call it here at Highspot. And you're not going to do it all overnight, but that's a path you can take to really end up showing the true value of what your enablement team is delivering to the field and to the organization.
Okay, that's great. And then I'm curious, just because my background in corporations was mostly startups. And I actually wore an enablement hat myself for a little while.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Just because, somebody needed to do it and, we
That's
were a
fair, yeah.
startup. So it was like, sure, I can do operations. Sure, I can do enablement. Yeah, no problem. And then I found a mentor in enablement in another company to tell me what it actually meant. So when it comes to, especially you being reporting into the field ops team, is like, do you ever have reps push back on your enablement initiatives or just frankly not complete them? Because like getting that adoption of your enablement initiatives, it's like some people are begging for it and others are like, I don't have time for that.
If any enablement professional is out there saying, I have no problem getting people to do my training, they're lying to you. Because that is human nature. And so I think there's a couple things, but I think the biggest thing I think about is how do you make sure you create accountability with your sales leadership? So one conversation I do every quarter with my sales leadership team is, what enablement are we doing? How are we prioritizing it? And then what do you actually want your rep to do in the field? And the in the eye conversation of, you're holding them accountable to doing it in the field. I can teach them how to do it. I can enable them and give them all the tools and just-in-time information. But it's actually you that have to hold them accountable to doing the thing. And you have to also then coach them if they're struggling with it. And so it's this conversation and agreement, partnership again, that we have with sales leadership. And part of my job, yes, is sending reports and updates. We use Highspot for that, obviously, on where people are in actually doing these things. But it really comes down to, have you established a really strong partnership with sales leadership? And do they understand the importance of what you're doing? Have they bought into it? And do they feel confident in coaching to it? If they are not confident in coaching to what you are trying to drive, they definitely won't hold accountability. So
Such a good point.
make sure your managers understand what you're trying to do and how to coach to it.
I couldn't agree more. It's funny because I love your walk to value concept, because we talk a lot about leading and lagging indicators. So a lagging indicator could be, hey, do we have more pipeline? Are we selling more? Do we have more opportunities? But that's, in some cases 6-12 months later. So you look for, what are those leading behaviors going up to it? And yeah, enablement or with a partner can help them. Hey, let me give you the skill set to ask better questions, to do better qualification, to do better prospecting. But now I need managers to hold the line on those behaviors that we came up with, it, like a business review, like doing call blocks for business development, like doing better, discovery and asking those questions and having better discovery type calls, which we can measure with a gong or something else along the way, right? And then managers making sure they hold the line on it. You always say you got to inspect what you expect. So I really like your idea of this, walk value and how enablement plays a role in that flow with the rest of the organization. Which leads me to this question: how do we do a better job of aligning enablement? And it's these other groups as well with the go-to-market strategy. And what I mean by it is, because we struggle with it from the outside, right? How do I connect marketing, sales, operations, not to mention these sub-functions like business development and solution engineering and product to all be rowing in the same direction?
This is a tough one, and I could spend an hour just on this question. So I'm going to keep it as short as possible on my perspective. And frankly, I change my approach as I learn all the time here. But I'll tell you what's working for us right now. And that is, we do a couple things. We take voice of the field information. So we talk to our reps, we talk to our managers, we find out what they're struggling with and where they'd like to go. We look at the data. Where are we performing? What are we doing really well that we want to just expedite? And what are we not doing so well? Are our closed won rates down? Are we struggling with competitors? What is out there that we really could go tackle from an enablement perspective? So we take the voice of the field, we take some data, and then we go to sales leadership and get their perspective. The fourth intake is with what I call our collaboration partners. So I go to RevOps and I go to marketing, sometimes even finance and G&A, and say, what do you want the field teams today to do differently? in 6 months, 3 months? What if you could wish one thing, what would it be? We put all of these things on a Zoom board, whiteboard, and they're all little sticky notes. And then I get all of those leaders in a room together, and it's actually a really fun meeting. And we prioritize. We put things in 2 different categories. One is accountable. This is absolutely something we have to have reps accountable to doing. And then we have available. This is stuff that enablement might build some just-in-time information for, might build some process documents. But like, we're not going to go track that or enforce it. It's available to the reps. And so we put things in these 2 categories. And then there's, of course, the deprioritized category. So we end up taking, sometimes we'll end up, I think last quarter we had 87 things on our list.
Wow.
We got down to 6. And so this really interesting meeting where we combine thoughts together and really prioritizes the go-to-market team. And so now I know that RevOps knows what I'm driving. Marketing knows what I'm driving, and all of those teams are aligned to the same goals. And so we're all having the same conversation. And as a rep, I feel way less overwhelmed because I'm not getting asks from all over the business. Everything's just coming through enablement and my manager.
It's funny you say about not getting confused. I was just at an account and I go, hey, so what are your key business drivers? And they're like, well, we got to be profitable by the end of the year. Fantastic. And 13 other items came out. And I go, I don't know how you're going to accomplish the first one because I forgot about it halfway through your list.
Yeah. And that's,
there's always more than you can tackle.
For sure. And that because Carlos mentioned we have the leading and lagging indicators conversation. I literally just had that before this call with a client. And it's interesting because sometimes they haven't yet established what the baseline is. So when you're trying to set some goals, it's like, okay, well, where are we today? And then what does success look like? Is it a 2% increase? Is it a 5% increase? Is it a 20% increase? So trying to first nail down like, okay, where do we feel we are as adopting whatever as an organization? And where do we feel our reps are? And then, okay, where do we want them to be? To your point there, Kelly, about like, okay, what do you want them doing in 3 months, 6 months? And, and then ultimately tying that back to a corporate objective, right? Like, where is the company going? Because everybody needs to be on that ship of like, okay, whether it's a 5-year goal or a 10-year goal, what is that ultimate corporate objective? And then how do we break it down into bite-sized pieces to make sure that we're all working towards getting there? And I think that, having that conversation can be super overwhelming for people. So, but kind of in that same thread, I'm kind of curious because now I've got myself thinking about it. Where does that evaluation of the field and the adoption crossover with actual like performance reviews? Is enablement a part of that, or is that something that should be totally separate with the manager?
So we combine them to a degree.
Okay.
And so the way I look at it is we create a competency model. And these are things that we expect our reps at certain levels of their career are able to do.
Okay.
And it's an easy way for a manager when they're having performance conversations to say, are you meeting where you need to be in all of these categories? So in that way, we are very involved. That being said, we partner very, very closely with HR, and they are experts in this area. So they own our quarterly performance process, but we influx that with our different competency and skill models so that we can set some expectations. We also do a lot around helping managers understand what hiring best practices. So HR comes in and does a lot of hiring best practices, but then we come in and say, okay, but you've hired 10 people, and of those, these ones have been successful. What did they have in common? And then we can map that to our competency models as well to really have those kind of tougher conversations to hold yourself accountable that you're hiring the right people.
Okay, so now I have a little more fun question just based on what you just said there. Have you ever noticed something that was a surprise, like someone who had certain qualities or traits or skills, and then their competency showed something that you went, okay, well, actually now we had this hiring profile, and it turns out that this person is actually excelling at this, even though they didn't really meet the profile. Like, can you think of any examples where you were surprised?
I don't have I do probably have some personal examples. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I think The reason for this is kind of twofold. I think you look at how many women are in sales compared to men, obviously trending better. But I think a lot of that was because previously, when you looked at what they were looking for in candidates, they were very masculine traits. And I think, and I've talked to a lot of male leaders who have had really successful women working on their team, and they say they didn't fit my profile in terms of skill and competencies and traits, but they ended up being very, very successful. And so I think there's something to do there. I also, we spend a lot of our time talking with our leaders about EQ. And I do think EQ can overcome other competencies and skills in a lot of ways. And so if you have someone that you're interviewing that can read the room really well, react really well to conversations, be audible ready, those individuals might not have your product skills. They might not have some of the other things that you consider really important, but they make up for it in other ways. And I think that's where you get the most surprise. And so actually one of the first things I look for is like, what is your EQ and how are you going to interact with customers?
Yeah, that makes a really good point. There was a company I worked for that ultimately it turned out almost all, we'll say 90% of our sales reps were male, and our buyers were like over 90% female.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we actually did the analysis, it was like, just one of those moments. We won't go any deeper than that. But I've got one more question for you. And again, not to put you on the spot, but of course, this is something that's very top of mind for everybody right now. So I'm curious, how is the rise of generative AI affecting enablement and your role? Have you adopted any of it? Like, what do you see adopting in the future? Or is it going to be something that needs to be human driven?
You know what? I think I heard a quote once that it's make AI your companion, not your competitor. And that is what I believe. It has been game changing for my team and our reps, frankly, and especially our sales managers. I think here at Highspot, we've done a lot of things to enable AI for our reps, like simplifying follow-up, making it easier for them to follow up. But then for managers, we've done AI coaching. So a lot of time, managers don't have time to listen to 8 calls from every rep a week. And so letting AI provide feedback on calls and helping them hold themselves accountable for actually using a rubric and accurately judging that call. And then for enablement, we use it all the time to get ideas and to plan and design. I think we spend a lot of time designing. Enablement's a lot of content creation.
Yeah.
And so being able to use AI for design features has been game changing for our team, especially me, who is not great at design. So yes, I think AI is something we have to embrace and continue to embrace. And I think it's a really important conversation that we're having in the enablement community to understand best practices because it's happening so fast and you can get left behind really quickly. And so it's almost something that you have to purposely set time aside to think about. And frankly, your reps want it. Your reps know that their peers at other companies are using AI to make themselves more effective. And so you need to be thinking about it for your teams as well.
Yeah, it's been a hot topic.
I'm sure.
It's like everywhere we talk to folks. And you're right. I mean, on one end of the spectrum, it's taking over the world and we're going to be blobs on ships with, whatever that movie was. And on the other hand, hey, it's just a tool. I mean, the calculator and computers did change the workforce, but it didn't. It just evolved. We just got to be more productive.
Yeah, I was talking to another company recently, and they were telling me that really interesting data that people still buy from people. When you look at the data, they buy from people. And so sales reps, yes, I think there's some commodities out there that might require less handholding from a sales rep, but to do really consultative selling, I think is still going to be a thing. It is a craft you can hone, and I think is still so important to a really strong sales organization. So I don't think AI is replacing us anytime soon. I hope I'm not wrong.
Kelly, I'm with you. And 20 plus years ago, one of the core principles of value selling was people buy from people. And I agree with you. I think it's still true today. Now, granted, people want frictionless transactions. Hey, I want this widget. I'm used to buying it on Amazon. I'm going to take that same concept into the workforce for stuff. But we're not selling widgets like Highspot. I mean, if it truly was a widget, we wouldn't need salespeople, right? We'd show a little demo on our website, put your credit card here, and we'd be done with it. But what happens is, whoa, this is complex and I don't know how it works. And I want to talk to somebody about it. And I want to think through the scenarios and how would it work in my organization? And that's where, yes, we could automate some of those questions. But let's face it, I think people want to hear someone on the other end that has empathy and listen to their questions and pivots and has stories about how the product's used. And that makes all the difference in the world. And even though we talk about commodities, sometimes in the workshop I talk about like the story about I needed a new roof of the house and 5 roofers came out and 5 of them all had a book with pictures and we have insurance and we do roofs. And 5 of them all went out and did measurements. One of them came back into the house while he was doing a measurement and came out and asked me to come out. And he pointed out different aspects of my roof and said, hey, you got to make sure you put over there. And have you had any damage in that area? And I didn't. But the fact that he called it out and showed that extra concern about that aspect of my roof made me feel like, well, the other 4 people that gave me a quote, they could be doing the same flashing, but they didn't point it out to me. This person did. They showed they cared. They showed they care an extra to go that extra mile. And for that, he was in the middle of the pack pricing. I went with that individual. So I'm with you. Somehow we still got to show that going forward. And AI might be a great tool to help us do it more efficiently. But hopefully people still want to talk to someone else.
Absolutely.
You talked, when we talked ahead of time of this podcast, you talked about having this closed loop and you mentioned the voice of the field. Are there other things that you do to create better feedback across the organization? Because, when we talked about it and I thought about it some, I think sometimes, parts of organization get siloed. Like field says, well, we don't know anything about the new product. Enablement says, well, we gave you 15 different training items on it. And it's like you're siloed and being from the outside in. I go, hey guys, I can help promote your 15 items, but are they really what they need? And then from the field side, did you actually pay attention to these things? Did you give them feedback that these 3 were good and these other ones weren't? Any recommendations on how do you create better, feedback across the org?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. I'll focus on one that we just trialed this year and was hugely successful. So we call it our Revenue Advisory Board. And it was a nomination process of our top reps, not top reps, typically reps that were in that 90% to a little over 100, reps that are very engaged and will give feedback, but also talk to their peers and know what their peers are thinking and feeling. And so they got nominated into this process, voted on, and we brought them together twice this year in person with our executive team, so our C-level team. And the session was just to listen to them. We didn't present to them at all. We just listened to them. We came in with a bunch of questions and let them talk, share their experiences, share their stories. And that has been a huge insight for us on where we need to prioritize and focus. Some things, it was really interesting. There were certain things that were like, this is a huge problem. We're never going to be able to solve for it. Talk to the reps. That's easy. We can solve that. All you needed was a different piece of content, turns out. And then there were bigger problems that we didn't think were an issue that we could also go prioritize and solve. So Revenue Advisory Board, huge benefit for us, very low lift. It's literally just getting people in a room to have a discussion and really listening and not talking. And it's been great and we'll continue it.
I love that. It's a great idea. Hey, I love to make this one of those Joe Rogan 3-hour ones, but unfortunately, our production company frowns on these things. Not cool enough yet. But so here's we have some closing questions for you. And Kelly, the one I'd like to jump to is, hey, we've all had steps and challenging, things in our career that kind of teach us the biggest lessons. What might be a misstep that you've had in your career that kind of taught you one of your best lessons in life?
So I don't know that it was the most challenging, but it was definitely the scariest. And it was when I made the jump from being a rep to a frontline leader, but also stepping back from big enterprise sales into sales leadership in an inside sales team. I knew that I was not taking the traditional path. The traditional path would have been to be a leader at an organization doing the same job, which is moving from rep to manager. And everyone looks at that career ladder and you're like, that's the thing I have to do. That's the next step. And I decided to prioritize my family at the time so I could get off the road. And I took a massive pay cut and I went back and did it. And I had to trust in myself that I could get myself back to where I wanted to be in a short amount of time. It luckily worked out for me. So I always say to people, you got to follow your gut when it comes to these things. But it was the scariest thing I've ever done because it felt like everyone around me was looking at me with seven eyes, like, what are you doing? This is the wrong career move. This is absolutely the wrong direction you're going in. But I knew for me it was the right thing, and it's worked for me. So I think, you just kind of got to trust your gut sometimes, and it's okay if your career doesn't look like the person sitting next to you.
So true, especially these days. I mean, you spend any amount of time looking at LinkedIn and people's career paths are all over the map. It's not the way it used to be, like
Absolutely not.
I still get people saying like, oh, well, I mentor a lot of people who are younger in their careers and they'll say, well, I don't want to have like all these short stints on my resume. And I was like, go look at any CRO on LinkedIn. And I guarantee you they've got at least 2 jobs on there that they were at for less than 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's just changed. It's changed. And I think, the power is much more in the employee's hands, and that's okay. And employers recognize that. So I love that story. And that advice because that's important. Don't compare yourself to other people, folks. So I'm curious because especially in this role, you are a buyer. So people prospect to you constantly. You're evaluating different technologies, enablement technologies, and all of that for your team. What are some of the top 2 things that really stand out to you personally when you're when you're evaluating different solutions like that a salesperson can do, something actionable that, our listeners could go to work tomorrow and really think about and probably try?
So this might take some help from marketing. And I love this question because it's hard. And I actually we have a team of ADRs here about how they do this. And I never reply to an email. I'm sorry. I just don't. The messages, I get hundreds of them. And I definitely don't answer my phone because sorry, Mom, I don't even answer when she calls. I call her back. So there's no phone. But do you know what I will take advantage of? I am very impressed by the networking within the enablement community. I take it very seriously. So if I'm going to a conference, if there's an event in my local city, I will prioritize taking the action to go meet with my peers. And it's a huge benefit for you if I'm there, because I'll definitely have a conversation with you at an event. And so now I'm going to get a lot of event invites.
Yes.
We're going to have to listen to the whole podcast. But it's really around helping me network because that's how I learn from our community and grow and get better. And so it's almost consultative in that they're inviting me to these events.
I like that. We had a CISO say basically the same thing. Hey, if you're going to try to reach me, forget it. But I intentionally go to events to learn about what's new and what's the latest technology and what are other ways of solving problems. Present there and prove it to me that you're worth listening to, and I'll either reach out or I'll have someone on my team reach out. So that's a great point, Kelly. And I think it's just part of executives that are just being uber busy. We got to find different ways to connect with someone because we only have so many cycles. All right,
we're busy and we're also a little lonely. I think the funny thing about they always say that leadership levels are a little bit lonely. it's so helpful for us to talk to our peers and learn from our peers. And most executives are very open to that conversation. So I think it's really helpful.
Yeah. Do you guys have like a user group? Because in the old days,
We do.
that was like my best event of the year. We would do a user
my
group in
favorite
Europe
events,
and a user group in the US. And we would sometimes get active prospects that come to the user group to listen to the presentations of other customers. And it was awesome.
That's how you close deals.
Yeah. All right. Last question of the day. We call it Acceleration Insight. What might be that one piece of advice, be it business or personal, that you would love to share with our listeners that would make them as successful as you are?
So there is a book by Liz Wiseman called Impact Players, and it's for fairly junior individuals in their career, but I love this book. I give it to everyone I mentor as well as my peers. But the concept of an impact player is think about the jobs that need to be done and take the initiative and do them. I think it's so easy to look at your remit and say, well, I don't know. Am I stepping on toes? Ask the questions and then do the work that needs to be done. I think that those are the individuals that can grow in their careers. So be an impact.
I'll add that to my cart. every time I get a book recommendation, I add it to cart on Amazon. So Kelly, thank you so much again for joining us today. If one of our listeners wanted to contact you and talk to you about your work at Highspot or, interested in engaging with you for potentially mentorship or whatever, what's your preferred method of contact? Obviously not email or phone, folks.
Reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you're one of our customers, reach out to me on the Spark community or via SE Pro. But yes, I love to network. Talked about it a lot. Now I'm repeating myself, but yes, please reach out. Love to be a resource.
Amazing. Well, cannot thank you again for taking the time today, Kelly. We know how valuable your time is. So thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you both. This was fun.
Thank you, Kelly.
It was. All right, everybody, that does it for this episode. Please check us out at www.b2brevexec.com. Share this episode with your family, your friends, your coworkers, your kids, and you can subscribe through YouTube, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. If you like what you hear, you can also leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. We would really appreciate it. Yes, we're pandering for reviews. I'm Lisa Schnarr, and I'm joined by my ever-delightful podcast partner, Carlos Noche. And until next time, we wish you nothing but the greatest success.
You've been listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.